double. Ada orang tak kena masuk. Siapa yang pakai
Salam.
double lah. Ada orang on.
Yes, thank you very much. I can still hear echo.
I think this one is better. This one is better.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Professor Dr. Nurlida Abu Qasim, Dean, Kuliah of Education. Respected chairpersons of the conference, Professor Daud Al-Hidabi, Associate Professor Dr. Suhaila Hussein, Associate Professor Dr. Siraji. Distinguished keynote speakers, respected senior officials, academicians, administrators, participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning. To all of you in Malaysia and to those who share the same time zone, and to our participants who are of different time zone, thank you from the very bottom of our hearts for being here with us for the International Conference on the Integration of Knowledge in Higher Education, ICIOK 2022. For your information, this conference can be viewed live via Kuliah of Education YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, let us start our event today with the recitation of Kitab Al-Fatiha. Alhamdulillah. To gain barakah and blessings for our event today, I would now like to call upon Al-Fadhil Ustaz Dr. Ikram Muhammad from Kuliah of Education to lead the Dua recitation. Falyatafaddal mashkura, Ustaz.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا. يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك الكريم وسلطانك. سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك كما أثنيت على نفسك. فلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا ولوالدينا وارحمهم كما ربونا صغارا، ولجميع المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم إنا نسألك سلامة في الدين وعافية في الجسد وزيادة في العلم وبركة في الرزق وتوبة قبل الموت ورحمة عند الموت ومغفرة بعد الموت. اللهم هون علينا في سكرات الموت والنجاة من النار والعفو عند الحساب. اللهم إنا نسألك من الخير كله عاجله وآجله ما علمنا منه وما لم نعلم، ونعوذ بك من الشر كله عاجله وآجله ما علمنا منه وما لم نعلم. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضاه، اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضاه، اللهم وفق مجلسنا هذا لما تحبه وترضاه، ووفقنا ووفق كل المشاركين جميعا يا رب العالمين. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكون من الخاسرين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. آمين.
Thank you, Seth. Ladies and gentlemen, for your information, the theme for this conference is Towards an Integrated and Holistic Education in the 21st Century. It is co-organized by Kulia of Education, IIUM, and the International Institute for Muslim Unity. The aim of our two-day conference, among others, are to discuss and enhance understanding of the Islamic paradigm, provide a platform for a two-way forum for scholars, professionals, academics, graduate students in sharing of their latest research related to the area of integration of knowledge, showcase the latest trends and issues in IOK, promote and encourage a holistic IOK approach, and propose and consolidate the way forward in the efforts of IOK in various disciplines. Ladies and gentlemen, I now have the greatest pleasure to invite Honorable Professor Dr. Nurlida Abu Qasim, Dean, Kulia of Education, to deliver her welcoming address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Dr. Faiza, who has kindly become our MC for today. Alhamdulillah. So I'd like to begin by welcoming our esteemed invited speakers, our keynote speakers, plenary speakers, our presenters and participants, our postgraduate students who have, we're looking forward to attending this conference. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our international conference on the integration of knowledge in higher education, which is, as Dr. Faiza mentioned just now, jointly organized by the Kulia of Education and also the International Institute for Muslim Unity of the IIUM. I would also like to begin to this welcoming remarks to offer my heartiest congratulations to the organizing committee for making this conference happen, and my deepest gratitude to everyone involved to make this conference a success. I see that there are lots of wings, people who are involved from the Kulia of Education, and also we are very pleased that the conference has attracted participants from all parts of the world, and I think this is not something that can be achieved single-handedly. So with the support of everyone in the Kulia of Education, as well as the International Institute for Muslim Unity, IMU of the IIUM, Alhamdulillah, we have managed to get quite a number of participants for this conference. And I must say that we have presenters and participants from the UK, from the Middle East. We have one from the African continent, the Indian subcontinent, as well as in the ASEAN region. And as mentioned by Dr. Faiza, Associate Professor Dr. Faiza, I hope that those in the different time zones, especially those behind us 4 or 5 hours, that it's not too early to attend this conference. So this much-awaited conference is a momentous event and part of the IIM initiative to enhance efforts in the integration of knowledge, be it in the integration of various disciplines of knowledge, the integration of dominant and indigenous knowledge, and or the integration of revealed and human acquired knowledge. Now, it is, now, as we understand it, it's without question that the quest for and propagation of knowledge is mandatory in Islam. However, dominant knowledge, which is largely secular in nature, has spread into our daily lives as well as in our education in the Muslim world. So, understanding the difference in knowledge that is embedded within the secular worldview and knowledge that is based on Islamic faith and worldview is critical. So this is why I and members of the Kuliah feel that this conference is very important and it's very timely, so that we have a better understanding about how to integrate the relevant dominant knowledge as coming from the West mainly, and also the Islamic legal knowledge, so that the purpose of seeking knowledge in Islam is preserved. My heartfelt gratitude to Professor Dr. Dawood Abdul Malik Yahya Al-Dabi and Associate Professor Dr. Suhaina Hussain for leading the organizing committee as the conference co-chairs. My heartfelt gratitude also goes to Assistant Professor Dr. Abdul Majid Muhammad Abdul Wahab Al-Jabbar, the Coordinator for Internationalization, as Secretary of the conference, as well as to all the organizing committee for their dedication and tireless efforts to make this conference a success. We have a WhatsApp group and I can see how everybody is working very hard, and I truly appreciate that. So on behalf of the organizing committee, the Kuliah of Education, and also IMU, our deepest gratitude to Emeritus Professor Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, Director of IIUM, for his dedication towards education, education in general, and the integration of knowledge, and his support for the conference. Now, when Tan Sri Rector first joined us, the first Kuliah that he looked at, and he's looking at, is the Kuliah of Education, for us to lead the way and for us to champion not only integration of knowledge but humanizing education in this university and also nationally and globally. So at the moment, Tan Sri Zul is not able to be with us as he is attending the UNESCO World Higher Education Conference in Barcelona, Spain, and he is, sorry that he's not able to be with us. But we hope that and we pray that Allah SWT will ease his efforts to make integration of knowledge, humanizing education as part of our initiative in reshaping ideas and practices in higher education. However, he is always with us, alhamdulillah. To our renowned keynote and plenary speakers, we are humbled, we are truly humbled by their commitment in sharing their knowledge and making time to be part of this important conference. The Kuliah of Education would like to express our gratitude to IMU and also the International Institute of Islamic Thought, IIIT, for making the sponsoring of 100 international students to participate in this conference a reality. So my last words would be, may Allah SWT reward each and everyone who have participated in making this conference a success. May Allah SWT reward each and every one of you abundantly for the kind contribution to this conference, for the sake of Allah SWT and also our Muslim Ummah and also mankind in general. So wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Nurida Abdul for the enlightening address. Esteemed participants, ladies and gentlemen, we will now play the recorded speech of Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of the International Islamic University, Malaysia.
Ta'ala barakatuh, a greeting of peace and a very good morning, afternoon and evening to wherever you are. Let me first of all start by thanking the organizer for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts and experience on what we call the integration of knowledge, particularly in higher education. I think all of us are very much aware that education today, particularly after the pandemic, is undergoing many changes, and some of the changes we have seen it before, but I think moving forward, this whole idea of putting knowledge together in a kind of a convergence is something that many of us are thinking and working around it. So I'm taking this opportunity to share some of the experiences that we have had in this university, the International Islamic University, in trying to understand what integration of knowledge is all about from the practical point of view. I believe there are other speakers who are better qualified to talk about the philosophical dimension of it, but let me just today try and illustrate how this university in the last couple of years within the pandemic trying to make sense or meaning into what integration of knowledge is in higher education from the practical point of view. On that note, I would like to talk about what I call the three modes of integration of knowledge in higher education, given the experience in this university, as I've mentioned earlier. Now, to start off with, we all understand that education is something which is very important. Some people talk about education as a right, that everybody must undergo a form of education from the very beginning right to higher education, so that this can bring changes to many of our community and even ourselves and the way we conduct to make the future more palatable, more suitable, and in fact more productive as far as life is concerned. The pandemic has mentioned or has illustrated many things that education somehow rather has failed to deliver. When there is a shutdown, when there are people who are not being able to access education the way they should be, and therefore the whole idea of education as a right becomes a very important topic for us to look into in seminars of this nature. But I do wonder, when we talk about education or higher education in particular, which one are we referring to? There are many ideas of what higher education is all about. In fact, many ideas of what education is all about, given the development in terms of economy, in terms of politics, and even in terms of science and technology. Somehow or other, in many cases, education has been redefined to not education the way we understand it from the conventional point of view, but rather more industrial-led maybe, or scientific-led maybe, or many other dimensions, the way how people fashion what education ought to be for the future, and so on and so forth. So my question is therefore, when we talk about education, what do we actually mean? Which of this dimension of education is important for us to talk about in the context of integration of knowledge, as it were? Now, fortunately, I think in the last 2 years, this question of education, particularly what the future brings as far as education is concerned, has been a topic of global discussion. UNESCO and various other international bodies has worked on what they call the futures of education. learning to become. In other words, what is it that education would deliver at the end of the day as part of the pillars of education? There are 4 pillars of education: learning to do, learning to know, learning to be, and learning to live together. And now we have another one called learning to become. It invites us to reimagine how knowledge and how learning can shape the future of humanity and planet. It is not just the future of a country, of a nation, of an individual, but we have this vast dimension of the humanity and the planet in one go. And how do knowledge and learning make this happen? And this is where I thought this whole idea of integration of knowledge becomes important, because we need to talk about the oneness of knowledge, the oneness of learning, because it will serve the one purpose for humanity and the only planet we've got. Until and unless we understand this well, then the future of humanity and the future of planet, the way we want it to be, will not be served. And the pandemic again tells us, unless and until we have a common understanding of what knowledge and learning is all about, for the sake of humanity and the planet, we will not be able to do this. Now, this is not something which is new. I think as far as the record goes, I think we have been talking about learning to be, the world of education today and tomorrow, way back in 1972. This is done by a commission that was then, belaboring on this idea of learning to be. Learning to be, in essence, is to understand the whole person, who we are and what are we going to be in the context of education for today and also tomorrow, and that tomorrow can also be the future. And then in 1996, there's another very classical book called Learning the Treasure Within. A commission also made a chat by Jacques Delors, and this talks about the 4 pillars of learning, as I mentioned to you earlier: learning to do, learning to know, learning to be, and learning to live together. And recently, as I mentioned, we add on to another one, learning to become. And just 2 years ago, just before the pandemic, or just about the pandemic, we celebrated the International Day of Education that talks about education for the people, the planet, prosperity and peace, and indeed it could also be partnership. So I'm trying to demonstrate how things has changed around when we talk about learning and the future of learning and the role of knowledge and how knowledge could serve all these purposes of just not the individual, but the whole planet, the people that is in the planet, and also the future of prosperity and living at peace with one another. So this is a bigger context when we talk about an integration of knowledge that I want to bring into the discussion, so that we look at integration of knowledge not only as an academic exercise or something that we frame in a very sort of confined understanding of a community, or a nation, or a region, rather than looking at the vastness or the expansion of what knowledge ought to be for humanity and the planet, as it were. Now, recently, I think there is a very fruitful sort of initial discussion, and this is in the early 2021, that will fit into what we call the World Higher Education Conference, which is going to happen between May 18th to May 20th. And it's quite timely as far as this conference is concerned, that talks about what are the values, what are the core values that should be embedded into education, bringing back the notion of what education used to be, as a leveler of community, as a way of, breaking out from poverty, breaking out from discrimination, injustice, and all the things that now begin to be associated with university, given the pandemic, given the kind of disparity we see across the world, that education is no longer a leveler of society, but rather becomes also a source of inequity in many respects. And this particular discussion that was held under the auspices of UNESCO, and I'm very fortunate to be involved with this, that talks about thinking higher and beyond the perspective of the futures of higher education to the year 2050. So in other words, 2 decades from now, what is it that we can anticipate as far as education is concerned? What will be the role of integration of knowledge in the context of higher education? I think they come out with a very nice sort of piece of work which could be downloaded if you're interested. And then we have also another one that not only looks at the kind of an academic sort of understanding, but also coming from the public sort of understanding of what education and what they want to see. And there is a report called The Pathway to 2050 and Beyond. All this, I think, will be culminated in this world conference that we're going to have in Barcelona next week. And therefore, this becomes sort of the context that I want to bring about when we talk about integration of knowledge given the practical perspective as far as education is concerned. So let me start off by summarizing the key messages from all this discussion that we have got. What are the 4 or 5 things that we want to focus on when we talk about integration of knowledge, so that we do not lose the perspective, because there's so many things happening at one time that sometimes we get confused as to where the focus would be. As far as the key messages is concerned, in the context of futures education, we can at least name 4 of it. One is when we talk about how do we take responsibility for our common humanity. Taking responsibility for common humanity, to me, gives this notion of how do we integrate the things that we know so that we can be equally responsible not only for ourselves but for our environment and the world at large. How do you integrate this idea of coming together and discharging this responsible role that we are supposed to play in trying to reshape what humanity will be all about, particularly at the level of people who are not accessible to education and so on and so forth. Yeah, that is the first key message which I thought it is important. The second one that talks about how do you promote well-being and sustainability. This is something I thought which is new. When we talk about education, more often than not, we are talking about something which is very tangible, kind of the economic notion, the question of employment and employability, which is important. But now, under the pandemic, we begin to understand there is something which is more important than that. A question of whether we can sustain it. The question whether the sustainability, well, at the end of the day, will bring well-being not only to the person, but also the community and the world at large. And these are, by and large, are not easily measurable. These are, by and large, are not given in terms of numbers or percentages, the way we understand it when we talk about market and also employment and employability and so on and so forth. And this is another way of integrating what we want to have, not only the tangibles, but also the intangibles at the same time. How do you move into this convergence between the tangible and the intangible as part of this integration of knowledge as well? Yeah? Not everything as far as knowledge is concerned can be counted, but yet it is important for us to incorporate it, to integrate it into one whole to understand what the impact of the knowledge would be in the long run. The third message is about drawing strength from intercultural and epistemic diversity. I think by and large, we begin to understand now culture is also an integral part of knowledge, because within culture there are values, within culture there are norms, and also the building of civilization and the beginning of understanding of what knowledge is all about in a very diverse way. In other words, it is not a one-size-fits-all the way we understand it now when we talk about, say, for example, a world-class university. Yeah, there seems to be 3 or 4 indicators that you are a world-class university, and it disregards your context, it disregards your cultural values, your cultural norm, and in fact, it is a form, from my point of view, a kind of a colonial sort of understanding that you need to subscribe to one value that is promoted by one university at a particular sector in the global north or somewhere else. Yeah? and therefore it disregards the kind of values that we are supposed to inculcate in education given our own context. And this context certainly is diverse. Different countries, different situation, and different region will have its own way of trying to convey what education is all about within that cultural dimension. And this is another form, I thought, of integration, where we bring in all these cultural values in its diversity to make sure that there is an interconnectedness within a particular context, as it were. And therefore, the last point is about how do we create this interconnectedness. Yeah. In other words, everything counts. Every human life counts. It's not just all black, or not just black life matters or white life matters. All life matters, including the non-human life, including the environment. All these are what I say, what I mean by interconnectedness. How do you connect all these dots? Is education able to do this now? From my perspective, when we look at education today, we seem to disregard the environment. Therefore, the question of sustainable development becomes important. We seem to disregard the issue of spirituality, for example, just because spirituality or consciousness cannot be measured, and therefore people tend to disregard it. And therefore, we have problems with the question of well-being, understanding social, emotional sort of progress or mental health as far as that is concerned. Yeah. So within the scope of the discussion today, these are the 4 dimensions that I think we need to focus on when we talk about integration of knowledge in a very substantial way. You can, of course, go to town and talk about integration of knowledge in a very philosophical way, but how do you bring this into practical forms and make it something that is educationally relevant for the future and for humanity as a whole? On that note, there is not an easy answer, but I would like to go back to what we have been doing as far as this university is concerned. And the first mode that I would like to engage you with is what I call the very subliminal sort of understanding of what integration of knowledge within the vision and the mission and the value of that institution or that particular context. Yeah. So every university has got its own mission and vision. Every university has got its own set of values. It may be the same, it may be different. But how do you then begin to integrate it to start off with? If your mission and vision do not talk about integration of knowledge, then I think it becomes harder for you to bring in this notion of integration of knowledge because it is not well subscribed within that mission and vision of the university that tend to be very siloed. And now education is very siloed, very specialized, and we have seen the downside of it. Once you have a very siloed sort of university, then it does not relate. It could not connect with other sort of dimension that is now well, articulated as far as how do you come into a convergence in bringing higher education into the future. So at this level of vision, mission, and values, how do you actually understand this? And from my point of view, as far as the university is concerned, IIM is concerned, by looking at the first message of taking active responsibility for common humanity, I think that will be the kind of a bottom line that we want to look at. How do we contribute to humanity as a whole, regardless of where we are, because humanity in this particular context is one. Everybody is involved, regardless of who or where they are in the context of trying to bring education to the whole world, as it were. Now, in this respect, I think we go back to the mission and the vision of the university. We need to talk about this whole idea of integration in the context of being global. It is articulated in many by university, holistic, yeah, and bringing the human dimension. The vision. is not only about the local dimension that we talked about, but how they connect this to the world at large, so that human form, human life, and civilization can be celebrated at the same time. The university may be successful, but if it doesn't contribute to a larger perspective of human life and civilization, then I think we fall short of the vision of the university. And therefore, I see message number one, as far as this conference of futures of higher education is concerned, resonates very well with the vision of the university, except that now the university needs to be more mindful in trying to bring its responsibility out of the university into the world at large, not just confined to the local, although that is important in itself. Yeah. So there is this relationship that I'm trying to demonstrate to you, that the vision of the university and the integration of knowledge from the perspective of the futures of education must also be integrated in this particular sense. The second message that talks about promote well-being and sustainability, we go into this whole idea of how you are consistent in trying to demonstrate that we are actually going for the humanness of education when you talk about integration of knowledge. Yeah? In other words, we are trying to be resilient. There are ups and downs. How do actually knowledge contribute to this resiliency? How do you cope with the challenges around us? Pandemic is a good example. Most of us are not able to cope with the pandemic because we are not trained to cope with all the stresses and all the emotional sort of upheaval that we undergo when, say, we are into a lockdown, for example. Yeah? And we begin to realize that people who are not affected by this, particularly the indigenous community who are on their own, have got a way of organizing themselves. And therefore, what we think that indigenous leadership, and this is where the question of context becomes important, that they are able to manage, they are able to be more resilient than people who are living in the modern structures as far as education is concerned. Yeah? To this, we refer to the second mission of the university that talks about that we must be an agent of comprehensive and balanced progress and change, as well as sustainable development. In other words, within the ambit of higher education, this whole idea of being balanced, this whole idea of being sustainable must be part and parcel of that integration of knowledge that we talked about. The knowledge that we forecast or the knowledge that we convey must be able to bring this idea of a balance, idea of being harmony with the environment, and hence sustainable development. So this is another point that serves to illustrate, yeah? To promote well-being and sustainability, we also must have this whole idea, concept of resiliency, consistency, balance, the indigenous dimension, and sustainability all in one as far as integration of knowledge is concerned. We cannot do this by, again, just being siloed. Yeah? The science talk about the sciences, the humanities talk about the humanities, the religious people are confined with their religious ideas, and they are never integrated in one whole, so that then the question of knowledge being a support system for moving forward into the future is lost in that translation. As you can see that, we also talk about the 17th goal of sustainable development. In fact, we have added another one on number 18 there, where we think spirituality is important. So the university is also working on what we call Sustainable Development Goal 18, that talks about spirituality, which we will hope will fit into well-being and sustainability at the same time. As far as message number 3 is concerned, drawing strength from cultural and epistemic diversity, again, we talk about being divergent, recognizing divergence or pluralist ideas and and what they call norms are important. Yeah, they are all value-based, and they must be also part and parcel of the leadership that engage with these people who are actually practicing or teaching those value system at the same time. In other words, imbibing into their culture, understanding what the cultural diversity is all about, and where does it originate as far as the culture is concerned or the norms is concerned. Yeah. Here again, when we talk about the university, we've got vision number 6 or mission number 6 that talked about intercultural understanding and foster civilizational dialogue. In other words, in this university, we celebrate more than 100 nations, people from different regions, different walks of life coming together. But more importantly, how do we build this understanding? How do we live together in a community that promotes peaceful living, the harmonious and balanced living that we talked about, through dialogues and through discussion, as much as it is part and parcel of the academic sort of culture in trying to understand and also to build another platform where people can live with one another in a very harmonious way. Yeah? We have got what we call the global ummatic work. Ummatic is a description of a community that have a common understanding, not only in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of its practices, where different cultures can be assimilated and blend to one another to build a very strong sort of foundation of people living together, right? And in other words, culture becomes an important value. Culture is not homogenized. How do you bring all this to fore so that we can celebrate the diversity in the context of this intercultural understanding and dialogue as a part of integration of knowledge, as it were. The last message of number 4 upholds and create interconnectedness at a multiple level. Here again, we talk about almost the same thing, yeah? Being interdisciplinary, being transdisciplinary, bringing in that balance, yeah? And this balance, I think, is always important for us to ensure that there is this common understanding among people, among students, and also among the community. And for that, I use the word courageous leadership because often people would like to shy away from what is dominant. When you go into a dominant culture, you tend to hide your own cultural values. You tend to feel inferior about it. Yeah? And I think this courageous leadership means to us, how do we also display our own value systems, display our own cultural diversity, also try to connect with whatever that we are involved at the same time, so that we remain relevant in trying to promote this understanding among humanity and across the planet, as it were. And for this, I think we see our own mission number 7 that talks about integrating Islamic revealed knowledge and human sciences as one of the dimensions that we want to bring in as far as science is concerned, which is mostly understood from a secular point of view, but what will be the religious dimension on this? And that, I think, is a discussion that brings the connectedness into what we call now the non-materialistic science and the materialistic science. As science has gone away from this dogma of being just materialistic or in the context of being secular, how do you try to understand science from the revealed knowledge perspective, from the spirituality perspective, or from the consciousness perspective? I think there is a new making that is coming now that also bring the whole idea of integration of knowledge into a different kind of a thinking. This is part and parcel of the university sort of mission in trying to articulate and bring this conversion between these two knowledge that is important for us to be that human being that we are supposed to be as far as this university is concerned. So the context of transdisciplinary, which also means integration of all various disciplines together, yeah, in such a way that it creates a balance, and that balance is something that I think will be for everybody to share and everybody to appreciate in trying to make integration of knowledge relevant the way it is. So in a very general way, I've tried to demonstrate how the vision and the mission of university can be interrelated to this notion of the futures of university without sacrificing the integration of knowledge, as it were. Rather than going to a very specific, very siloed way of thinking, we want to expand this whole notion that knowledge can be brought together among various universities, various countries, and various culture as far as that is concerned. So that is at the level of the mission, vision, and also the value at one point. Yeah. Now, the second point that I want to talk about is how do you go in trying to make this happen? Yeah, those were maybe a very lofty way of understanding and making it, a kind of a principle that everybody need to subscribe to. But that is not the end of the story. The end of the story is how do you make this happen? In other words, when you talk about humanity, how do you bring humanity in the discussion that we are talking about when we talk about integration of knowledge? How does this relate to the planetary health, the planetary well-being, which is now under sort of a threat, as it were? So the second mode is about more of the process and how do you operationalize it, given that level of understanding of the mission, vision. And this is where I think the question of values becomes important. Yeah? In this university, we have got 4 sets of values that we think it is important. One is what we call the Khalifa, which I will translate very cursorily into trusteeship. It's not about ownership, it's about trusteeship, it's about stewardship in a way. Yeah? We talk about amanah, which is a question of ethics, the question of trust, the question of trustworthiness. Yeah? How do you actually convey this when you have got this trusteeship within you in trying to lead the way, as it were? We talk about iqra, it's a question, the whole process of knowledge, not only memorizing, not only recitation, but also reflecting it, and more importantly, in translating it into reality. In other words, the knowledge is not an abstract thing, the knowledge is something to be conveyed and to make changes where it is relevant for the betterment of human life and civilization, as we have stated in our mission. And that is, I think, very easily summarized as rahmatan lil alamin, meaning mercy to all. It doesn't differentiate one group to another group. It doesn't differentiate one form of life with another form of life. It is anything that is now created or in our context, is there as part and parcel of the planetary sort of life, then this becomes important. In other words, it is the total outcome. The total outcome of this mission of trying to integrate knowledge, can it bring this peaceful living across all creation, all being, and also the world or the planet as such. Yeah? So these are the values that I think that is important, that need to be translated when we talk about integration of knowledge. This value becomes the foundation, that the integration of knowledge is seen in the context of trusteeship, ethics, knowledge, and also the outcome which is relevant to that form of knowledge. Now, this again in itself has to be integrated. Although we talk about the trusteeship in the context of Khalifa, ethics in terms of amanah, but all this I think needs to be integrated again. In other words, when you have this ethics, it has to be related to trusteeship, it has to be related to knowledge, it has to be also given a dimension of its own outcome. How do you integrate this again becomes another issue, so that at the end of the day we can focus into what we think it is important as far as community, as far as the individual, and as far as the world is concerned. And this is where I go back to this whole idea of indigenous leadership. And this indigenous leadership, in this context, we have got this word called sejahtera. Yeah? The word sejahtera tells us the balance, the harmony that we talked about earlier. In other words, at the end of the day, when you talk about the outcome, it is about creating a balanced, harmonious way of living without sacrificing the human dimension at all. Yeah? So in other words, humanizing education becomes the one of the important outcome of this integration of knowledge, as it were. Now, this is not something new. As I talk about Rahmatan lil Alamin, you see this in different society. In Japan, they've got the same idea of sejahtera, but they call it ikigai. Yeah? In Sweden, they've got the word lagom, also meaning the same thing. We have got Ubuntu in Africa. We have got yin and yang in the whole Chinese sort of a culture. Yeah? And in our part of the world, the Nusantara, we've got this word sejahtera. And this sejahtera means that there is a common human heritage that can connect the Japanese civilization, the Swedish civilization, the African civilization, the Chinese civilization as a kind of a planetary understanding of what knowledge ought to be and how knowledge should be integrated. And therefore, the value system becomes a common value system that takes people together in trying to create this humanity that we talk about and the planetary civilization that we are advocating in that. Yeah? So given now, particularly when it comes to the pandemic, yeah, we need to have more of this solidarity, more of this understanding so that there is no discrimination, arbitrariness. As you talk about the vaccine, for example, there's a lot of examples that we can give there. But how do people come together because it is one life, one humanity, and one purpose. In other words, trying to save whatever that could be saved as far as integration of knowledge is concerned. I like to just quote this statement by the Secretary General in April. It talked that this is a time for science and solidarity. In other words, science to me, science of knowledge, yeah, and solidarity is the outcome of that solidarity, of that integration of knowledge. You have a global solidarity that understanding from one to another becomes almost seamless. And therefore we can move together as this humanity in a very, very consolidated way. Right? We don't look at race, we don't look at religion, we don't look at geographical location, we don't look at language anymore, because we understand humanity is one, and that is built on this knowledge that we are able to integrate, that everybody can understand it, right? And my last point on this is now the last thing is how do you actually operationalize this, right? So mode number 3, given the mission, given the vision, given the values, and given how we understand the values across the world, how do you actually make this happen within the individual and within the community? And in that respect, there are these 3 dimensions that I want to talk to you about. When we talk about education, there is the 3 H, which is the hand, the head, and the heart. Yeah? Often we talk about the hand, often we talk about the head, but the heart somehow or other is missing in this particular context that needs to be brought in. Okay? And therefore we find that the whole person, when we talk about the complete person, the whole person, as we understand it from learning to be, will be the construct when you talk about an integration of knowledge. The human being are also integrated in its own totality rather than just the knowledge per se as part of the translation of this integration of knowledge. Yeah? So very quickly, I want to just quickly underline this. When we talk about learning to know, we're talking about the mental capacity, the cognitive capacity, the knowledge that needs to be brought in. Yeah? Learning to do is about how do you actually translate this into skills and action. Knowing only but not doing it is not enough. How do you integrate this together? And this is often we talk about the IQ and the EQ at the same time. All right? There is one notion that everybody is familiar with. Yeah? Now we are beginning to understand that EQ and IQ is equally important, if not more important. But there is this other dimension that also we need to talk about, the physical dimension. The body intelligence or the physical intelligence, as it were, becomes part and parcel of this learning to do. Now, taking that away, if we add now the heart, now there is the other dimension of being awareness, being conscious, the understanding, the dialogue that we talked about. Yeah, it is about the learning to be. And the learning to be talks about not only the EQ, but also the SQ, the spiritual learning, the experiential learning, the learning that is within you rather than just outside you, the way we understand what education is all about today. And that will bring us to the total perspective of the 3H, which is learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, that will enable you then to learn to live together. And to live together in a sustainable way that talks about your attitudes, that talks about your values, and that talks about the holisticness and the completeness of that knowledge within the human person and also in its own environment. And this is where we talk about the lifelong learning, life-wide learning as part of the integration of knowledge that at the end of the day bring the complete human being to bear. And this is where the humanizing education becomes important if you work through these 4 pillars of learning, given the dimension of integration of knowledge in higher education, or not only higher education, maybe even before that, to make it happen better as we start at a very early stage. Yeah? I would like to conclude by these slides by talking about the 3H, the head is about to know and how to think and understand. Yeah, the hand is about how do you once you understand, how do you contribute, how do you create, and how do you lead at the same time. And the heart will focus you on the human person. That humanity is important. That people belong to the same sort of category, as it were, as life of every life matters. Yeah? How do you appreciate it? How do you create a sense of belonging, that human beings are one and the same? It doesn't matter who or where they are. And this, I think, needs to percolate, not through only the educators and the students, but more importantly, bringing in the community at the same time. In other words, the integration of the community and the university and the institution of learning becomes also another important integration that needs to be looked into. The university cannot work on its own without taking the community as part and parcel of that integration process of knowledge, as it were. Yeah? I like to quote Nelson Mandela. He talks about a good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination. But when you add to it the literal tongue or pen, this is where the learning to do is all about, then you have something very special. Yeah? Often the second part is something missing. Yeah? We never learn to articulate it well, although we are from a university, but we are never able to share this with the community because of the barriers that we have created for ourselves in trying to disseminate knowledge at the level that other people can understand, minus the jargon, minus the bombastic word, minus the abstract understanding. How do you then convey this knowledge to other people so that the integration of knowledge becomes a real thing as far as the future is concerned? Yeah? So on that note, let me just conclude this. If you want to soar above the pandemic, I think this needs to change. Now we talk about knowledge in terms of economic well-being. We talk about technological well-being, and STEM is the classical acronym for this. Yeah? And we are not sure where the community are. So sometimes we find that economics are good, technology is good, but the community somehow or other are left behind. And it is very clear when we talk about technological advancement. Yeah? The 4IR, the 5Gs and so on and so forth, the community, in fact, is put in a worse position. There are people in cases in Malaysia that have to climb trees to get connected. So it doesn't mean much if you don't have the community integrated in this development at the same time. Yeah? So we are still at the level of the human capital, about numbers, about tangibles, but the intangible part is not well integrated into this knowledge that we are talking about. So we need to begin to change. So in other words, we are not only talking about STEM, we are talking about stream, where R could be religion, E could be ethics, A could be arts, or M could be management, beyond just science and technology. And economy, the word eco is separate in itself in the context of ecology, in the context of environment, and so on and so forth, not just economic the way we understand it from the industrial processes. And that will take us into this community transformation. And that transformation is an important transformation where integration of knowledge becomes an important element. And this is what my university is trying to do, to bring back the human being into the human capital, so that the human being can, in our word we call insan sejahtera. The word sejahtera, if you remember, the balance, the harmonious, and also the total human being that is an outcome of a well-integrated education and knowledge, as it were. So on that note, I would like to thank you for your kind attention. I hope this very brief description, although it is not fully exploded, but I hope you can take some of the ideas on how to integrate knowledge from a practical point of view, from a logical point of view, that we are able to demonstrate within this university, and I'm sure other universities should be able to do the same way, if not better than what we have done. So thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, greeting of peace, and I thank the organizers once again for this opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, that address marks the opening of our international conference on the integration of knowledge in higher education, Iciok 2022. And once again, on behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to convey our heartiest gratitude to Professor Emeritus Dato Dzulkifli of the Razak, Rector of the International Islamic University of Malaysia, for that very meaningful address. And moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed very fortunate to have a renowned speaker in the area of IOK to share his insights and perhaps later answer several burning questions. With us this morning is none other Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Osman Bakar, and the moderator for this session is Assistant Professor Dr. Susanna Suhailawati Siddiq. Over to you, Dr. Susanna.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Dr. Faiza, our dear MC, and her voice is always mesmerizing. Okay, alhamdulillah. Now we have our distinguished speaker with us. Respected academicians, administrators, students, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and very good morning. In this wonderful Wednesday, we would like to welcome all of you again to this international conference on the integrations of knowledge in higher education 2022. I hope everyone is in good health, happy, energetic, and ready for today's program. I'm Dr. Susanna Suhailawati Muhammad Siddiq from the Kuliah of Education, IIUM, as the moderator for the second keynote speech. The title for this keynote session is The Fundamental or Foundations of the Integrations of Knowledge. So we are honored to have our distinguished speaker yang berbahagia, Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Osman Bakar from the International Institutes of Islamic Thought and Civilizations, IIUM. Welcome, Prof. Dato, to this session. I will now read a brief biography of our distinguished speaker. Professor Dato Osman Bakar, a doctorate in Islamic philosophy from Temple University, Philadelphia, is currently holder of a Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies and Renewal at Iciok, IIUM. He is also Emeritus Professor in Philosophy of Science at University of Malaya. He was formerly Distinguished Professor and Director of Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin Center for Islamic Studies, SOASIS, University Brunei Darussalam. Professor Dato Osman was also formerly Malaysia Chair of Islam in Southeast Asia at the Prince Talal Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., and Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and Research at University of Malaya. Prof. Dato Osman also is author and editor for 42 books and numerous articles on various aspects of Islamic thought and civilization, particularly Islamic science and philosophy, in which he is a leading authority. His most well-known books are Classifications of Knowledge in Islam, 1992, same year also Tawhid and Science, and his latest book are Colonialism in the Malay Archipelago, Civilizational Encounters 2020, and this year, Environmental Wisdom for Planet Earth, the Islamic Heritage. His writings have been translated into numerous languages, including Arabic, Turkish, Persian, Chinese, Bosnian, Urdu, Bengali, and Spanish. MashaAllah, Prof, MashaAllah. The last one, I must mention this. He has been named among the 500 most influential Muslims of the world since 2009. MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Congratulations, Prof. Dato. Okay. At the end of the speech, there will be question and answer for 15 minutes, but it depends on the time available, inshallah. Please write your question in the chat box and I will read them to the speaker. Without further ado, let's welcome Yang Berbahagia Professor Emeritus Dato Osman Bakar to deliver his talk. Over to you, Prof. Dato.
Thank you, Sister Dr. Susanna, for your very kind introduction. Thank you to the organizers, the Kuliah of Education, IAM, for inviting me to give a keynote speech after the rector. Thank you very much. My topic is the foundations of integration of knowledge. All right, I've prepared a few slides. Let me now. All right, I hope, can you see my slides on the screen?
Yes, Prof.
Yeah, all right, all right. Yes, the title of my presentation, The Foundations of Integration of Knowledge. I suggested to the organizers that I would like to add the word foundations, and this will be made clear later in this presentation. All right. Now, before I speak on the topic of integration of knowledge, I would like to say a few words about the general concept of integration itself. In other words, integration, the general usage of the word integration, all right, and not always integration of knowledge is one kind. Our focus will be on integration of knowledge, but I think by also discussing the general meaning, that it may help also, it may help us to understand better the integration of knowledge. Now, my own personal experience about this, in terms of the word integration, when I was a young boy, the first time actually in two disciplines. I used the word integration in two disciplines or in two areas. One is in mathematics. It happened that I was very much interested in mathematics, you know. So yes, one meaning of integration is as well as used in mathematics, but it is important to understand that in mathematics, the idea of integration conveys the integration points to moving to a higher order. In other words, from one particular order or degree or level, you are going up by 1 degree, by 1 level. And that's called integration. Basically, integration of algebraic functions of a certain degree, and then when you integrate, you obtain a function of higher degree. So basically, there, the idea of mathematical integration is going from one level to a higher level. That is important, very, very, very important idea, right? And the opposite of that is, of course, differentiation. Yeah. So from something, from a particular function, you differentiate, you go to a lower level. Now, in fact, in my own intellectual development, that idea that I learned in mathematics has some effect on my understanding of integration of knowledge as whole. The other one, around the same time, at the time, of course, Malaysia just became, just after independence, you know. So what was that was very current at the time was national integration. So this is in the area of political science, basically, national integration. Perpaduan, Malay, perpaduan negara, national integration. Why that concept is necessary? Because we have various ethnic groups, perpaduan kaum, ethnic groups. The country needs to integrate, basically to integrate its diverse ethnic groups, religions, languages, and so on. So why is the idea there? Important idea. The important idea is that there is variety, there is diversity that was in need of integration, and basically how to integrate. So that also was important. A thing that has left an impact on my mind. Of course, another meaning, of course, that was not at the time. It's only much later on. There is the integration as understood in psychology. Integration is understood in psychology. Of course, at the time you don't use the word integrasi with respect to the soul, to jiwa, to kepribadian. No, we don't use that. But the idea is there. Yeah, the idea that something is wrong with a particular person, not well with a particular person, not healthy. You want to go to something a healthy level. That's why the idea of in psychology, you want to make a person whole, to make a whole, because that person somehow is fragmented, is disintegrated. We have that, all right? So in my time when I was young, we had that, and pointing to that, you know, the OTC. Your generation does not, my one generation, OTC means otak tak center. OTC, otak tak center, which means that somehow the brain is not whole, it's not centered, it is granted from the other part. That's why. Yeah. So at the time, if you have OTC, you go to Tanjung Rambutan or Tampoy. So yeah, but the point, yeah, it points to that. Now, of course, I know. Recently, I gave a talk on Ghazali's psychology, and coming soon, and this on the 4th of next month. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that as well. All right. So that is in terms of the 3 major areas: mathematics, political science, and psychology. Now, so the word integration is also used in other areas outside the area of knowledge. Now, because of that, I would like to define what integration is. General meaning of integration, not yet integration of knowledge. I'll do that later. Now, integration in general I said, is the process of making a collection of objects into a unified whole. This is very important, unified whole, by means of well-defined methods at the hands of a knowledgeable person or group of persons, or the state of their unification. Yeah. So we use the word integration in general to refer to the process as well as the end product of that process, which is the state of the unification. Of course, that state is in various degrees, that we know. Yeah. So this and another thing I want to mention here, the word integration in English, all right, comes from to integrate. Now, integrate originally from Latin word integratus. So integratus means to make whole. So that's why I put that in the definition, into a unified whole. All right, let me go now to the fundamental elements of integration. All right, we understood just now what integration is, basically, roughly. We have a variety of things, diversity, and therefore how to unify that, all right? So basically it is variety and diversity that necessitates integration. Now, I said my definition provides the answer to the question, what must exist for integration to take place? Well, first, if you refer to the definition, first, of course, the things to be integrated. So if we are interested in this business called integration, then we have to ask, what are the things that need to be integrated in our own field, in our own area? So what are to be integrated? Next, of course, is the goal of integration. Into what? Or for what are things to be integrated? All right. Then, of course, we must have the integrator. Without integrator, integration cannot take place. And this is the problem, because sometimes we would talk about integration, forget this element, the integrator itself. We're only referring to the what to be integrated, the coordinator, but forget about the integrator. Who is integrating? Right? The other one is methods of integration. How are they to be integrated? So yeah, this is basically the basic questions, all right, that we need to answer when we deal with integration. Now, why the need for integration? Basically, why? The things that lends us into this thing called integration. Well, simply, I think our rector just now, Zul, I think makes reference to this. Of course, it's for the sake of unity. Why do we need integration? The ultimate answer is for the sake of unity. Unity of what? Unity of knowledge. And this is our core concern here today. And the unity of human societies, especially at the civilizational level. All right. These are the main lines that I want to present first. Now I go to, all right, from general understanding of what integration is, let's go now to a particular type of integration, which is integration of knowledge. So integration as applied to knowledge, right? Now, yeah, first we said the things to be integrated. Now, in terms of knowledge, right, this is very important. I put here the things that are normally being integrated. That depends on at what level, which area, yeah. But generally speaking, three things: data of various kinds. So this is, for example, a graduate student who's doing research. Okay, so the question of what kind of data the researcher is collecting and is analyzing. fall into this data of various kinds. All right. If data is only of one kind, then it's basically it's no problem. All right. Integration doesn't arise. Integration arises when we look at the data. We are dealing with empirical data. By empirical data, we mean data that we obtain by means of the use of our physical senses, by means of our by means of experiments. All right. So those are data. All right. But there are also rational data that have been produced entirely by our reason, our intellect. Right? Then in Islamic university like IIUM, of course, we have a kulliyah of revealed knowledge. Right? So the idea of revelation is that revelation is a source of data. So we categorize that as revealed data, right? So then we have data we obtain from the hadith, and so you have data of various kind in terms of how we obtain that, right? So that's one thing. Now, also to be integrated, yeah, are ideas and concepts. In our own area of study, we encounter with many ideas, many concepts from different sources about different things interpreted in different ways. All right, there's second things that needs to be integrated. Then, of course, we will have theories. Now, to integrate theories and perspectives in one particular discipline, we can encounter several theories. In education itself, you are not facing only one theory. There are many theories in education. So the theories of learning, for example, theories of child development, so many theories. But when we have that before us, then there is a need to integrate. So that's the first thing, things to be integrated. Now, the question of the goal of integration, the purpose of integration, this is important. So I put here the main goal of integration is attainment of wholeness, integrality, coherence, and unity. So that is, of course, is a gradual process. All right, we go on integrating until we attain this goal to the satisfaction of the discipline in question. Yeah. So this is important to the mind. Our mind loves unity, loves coherence, loves wholeness, loves integrity. We don't like chaos. We don't like chaos. We don't like disunity. So if we don't find the attainment of wholeness, coherence, and unity, then integration needs to be taken. All right. So basically, in terms of it's a more scholarly concept. What does it mean is that we are looking for, or rather, we are aiming to have a broader and unified view of things. We are looking forward to having a broad explanatory scheme. In other words, in our own area of study, we encounter many kinds of phenomena, all right, many kinds of events, many kinds of other things, but somehow there's no coherence, all right, or many issues not answered. We are waiting for answer. So we are therefore looking for a kind of broad explanatory scheme, how to explain things. That is what scholars are looking for in their own discipline, all right, especially in the science subject, natural science, or even social science. Yeah, how to explain certain phenomena. All right. So we need to look at the whole picture. So this is what we call some call it unified theory. In physics, for example, physics scientists are looking for a unified theory in various fields. So Albert Einstein did his part in coming up with a unified theory of relativity. All right. So in fact, in our own area, in each area, there is a need to come up with a unified theory that can explain many things. All right. All right. Next, the integrator. Now, about the integrator. Well, in other words, we are talking now about the mind that is doing the integration. Don't forget about the mind. Is the mind ready for integration? All right. We all like to do the integration, but how ready is our mind? This is the question. So I'm just giving here some traits of the mind, some traits of the mind that wants to do the integration first. All right. That mind must have the intellectual habit of seeing the whole rather than being content within the past. This is important to integration, right? You have many things, many elements, diverse elements, but what is the whole picture? Many of us are not content or just able to see the picture of the past, but we don't see the whole picture. As I say, what is the larger picture? The ability, but that ability is a habit, the development of habit. So I call it intellectual habit. Yeah? All right. And then the second one is intellectual habit of interrelating and unifying things. You must have that. Yeah. So when you have a set of objects, all right, we look at them. We want to relate. Just something like when the a psychologist looking at that person, particular person. We have our physical body. We have our intelligence. We have our desire. We have our motivation and so on. Our personal traits, all right, our preferences and so on. But the question is how to relate one with the other. So that habit, yeah. This, of course, in the university, we should be learning all this through all the years. Yeah? The university, the business of the university is integration. So if that is so, then all the knowledge about integration should be taught in certain subjects, for example. That is important because we want to develop the intellectual habit of interrelating and unifying things under study. But of course, only that person, the mind doing integration, must have a strong synthetical power. This is my comment. We all have been trained to have strong rational power, strong analytical power. We are very good at analyzing things, but rather poor at synthesizing things. So let's need a balance. We need a balance in our education between analytical reasoning or power and synthetical power. This based on my observation, based on my what I encounter in my long life as an academic. I see that somehow this synthetical power is declining. Now, the other one is apart. Okay, that is the mind, that is the nature of the mind that you're integrating. But what kind of knowledge we need to have? Yeah. So the integrator needs to have certain knowledge, the knowledge for unification. This must be this one must be taught in philosophy or science, must be taught in logic, in creative thinking. This needs to be done. So the knowledge of universal principle. Knowledge of universal principle. By this I mean particularly hierarchy and unity of knowledge. Now, the idea of hierarchy here is the idea of the meaning of the idea of involving element of transcendence, like going from one algebraic function of say of a certain power, and then you want to reach a power. There must some element transcendent. So but of course we want to understand hierarchy as an epistemological concept. In epistemology, all right, what is the meaning of this hierarchy of knowledge? And of course, unity of knowledge that is easier understood, of course, is well known. Unity, all right? Meaning again the question of interrelation of all components of knowledge. In the business called integration, this knowledge of universal principle is important. All right. Now, the other one is knowledge of principles of the sciences. Two different things. Yeah. Knowledge of the principles of the sciences means the principles of the humanities, principles of the social sciences, of the natural sciences, the medical sciences, and so on. Right. We should know the principles of these sciences. In other words, the very basis or foundation of each academic discipline. I listed here these categories which we should know to a certain extent. Ontological. So the idea of ontological is important to integration. All right. The idea of cosmological, that is important. Theological, anthropological, psychological. Basically, these are the 5 most fundamental categories of principles of the sciences. Of course, each integrator is not employing all these things, maybe some of it. But and talking of integration in general, integration of knowledge in general, then we should know about this, because it is where we get our integrating principle. Now, methods of integration. Integration is not a simple kind of logical having a number of steps. It's not automatic. It's not mechanical. All right. We need to use a lot of reason, kind of intuition as well. So methods of integration. But the point here, methods of integration involve what? Well, I'm saying that methods of integration, first of all, is about moving from particulars to universal. Right? Yes, if you want to integrate, all right, say a society with many different ethnic groups, all right, so you have to go for universals. And if you want to unify that, you cannot unify many ethnic groups by taking the traits of one particular group and then impose that on the others. No. Yeah, in other words, we need to go for universal criteria. But in general, we must move from particulars to universal. Look at the set of things that you want to integrate. Which one are particulars? Which are universal? If there are still particulars, how from there you go to universal? So what I mean is that universalization is a necessary step in integration. Now, the second one, of course, we need to identify key concepts. Key concepts in the area in which you want to do the integration. Of course, I'm more in the Islamic tradition. It's through definition. Yeah. Conceptualization through definitions. That's why in Islamic intellectual tradition, definitions were a very, very important feature. A very, very important feature. All right. Now, the next one is checking on interdisciplinarity of the integration issue at hand. That is a more difficult level. It is easier to integrate within a particular discipline. But if you have an exercise in an area which involves several disciplines, so the question of interdisciplinary, then the job, the task of integration is more difficult. Yeah, but we have to check on that. Yeah? To check on that, what are disciplines involved, and what things they share in common, and where they diverge from each other. This issue itself, issue of interdisciplinarity, is not well understood, at least in practice. In practice, somehow we are still slow at that. Now, but I'm saying this, in the Islamic intellectual tradition, there was a very much something was very much current. This question of being interdisciplinarity. Now, of course, the other one is this is the integration proper. The integration proper is to identify the broadest integrating idea. All right. In order to integrate, we need integrating idea. And then once we identify the integrating idea, then we proceed to evaluate. So this is basically that. And go next one. Now I just want to re-emphasize now the epistemological foundation of integration of knowledge. All right. Basically, all right. These are the 5 categories of or the 5 foundations: metaphysical or theological, ontological, cosmological, including natural, and then anthropological, including psychological, and societal and civilizational. All right. So in others, talk about foundation of integration of knowledge. These 5 categories are important. So these 5 foundations provide the various categories of principles of the sciences that are needed for integration. And the integrating ideas, very, very precious thing, the integrating ideas are to be found in the principles of the 5, on the 5 foundation. Well, how to find them? I don't have any answer to that. It's through intelligence and experience practice. All right. Now the levels of integration. Of course, one is at the micro level. What I mean by micro level is small scale integration in terms of the size of the elements. The size of the elements should be integrated. Then the purpose, the objective of that, all right? Maybe not to look for a theory, but just simply to have a broader picture of things, of issues, right? So we start from that, and I would say even undergraduate, final year student doing research for his or her semester paper, for example, then we start with that. Yeah, in other words, that is the lowest level, small scale integration. Then the method employed, right? Maybe not just several methods, but just one method, right? And intellectual simplicity of the integrator. So expect, of course, at a PhD level, we expect in other words, in terms of the capacity to integrate is much higher than in the case of undergraduate students. It's just, I think, common logic. Now, of course, the most common integration exercise that is at a micro level. Now, at the macro level, the last scale, with respect to the same levels of integration, all right, the experts, the authorities, the scientists, natural and social, all right, at the macro level. Now, this is large scale with respect to the same levels of integration, all right? So, large variety and wide scope of materials for integration, perhaps across several disciplines, right? Then the objective is a big synthesis, looking for a big synthesis. And then in terms of the wide range of methods. And of course, the core of this macro level is thought synthesis. And this is the kind of integration involving fewer people, the higher, basically, especially the specialist research, at this level. And then we have in between. So we have macro level, but the various levels in between, what I call here the intermediate level. All right, I have how many minutes more? Still have time. At this point, I would like to raise the issue of connection between integration of knowledge and Islamization of knowledge. We heard just now from the director about the mission of the university, all right? The integration of knowledge, Islamization of knowledge. I have been asked a lot of questions on this. In other words, what is the difference between integration of knowledge and Islamization of knowledge? Where do they converge and where do they differ? Well, I know different answers have been given. It's not just one. My own position on this matter is that because I've been involved for a long time in this, with both Islamization of knowledge and integration of knowledge, but as far as I'm concerned, right, my concept of Islamization of knowledge embraces the idea of integration of knowledge. Embraces. In other words, Islamization of knowledge is the broader framework than integration. Because integration, I always tell myself, integration serves something else. Yeah? Integration is to produce, to arrive at something. So, as I understand it, Islamization is broader than integration. But I would insist, I would assert that integration is central to Islamization. So it means, therefore, the centrality of integration to Islamization. We cannot do much in Islamization until and unless we carry out massive integration. That's the first one. Now, with reference to knowledge, we could assert that the heart of Islamization is integration. Now, the most fundamental principle underlying Islamization of knowledge is the doctrine of Tawheed, means just unity. Just that idea of unity, unification, all right? So the spirit of Tawheed is to enable us to have unity and to have unification. Now, Tawheed happens to be the most fundamental criteria of Islamicity. There are smaller criteria, various degrees of this fundamentality, but the most important, the most fundamental, there cannot be any other which is more fundamental. So basically, doctrine of Tawheed, which is to be understood not just at the level of unity of God, but its application at lower levels: cosmic unity, natural unity, human societal unity, humanity. Yeah. Now, at the level of ideas is that Tawheed, that unity, and at the practical level, at the level of action, all right, that refers to the Sharia. In other words, conformity to the divine law of Islam. Now, Islamization of knowledge is essentially, therefore, Tawheedization of knowledge. And from the perspective of Islamic epistemology, the most comprehensive integrative principle is Tawheed. So this is a very important point to be stressed as far as I see it, all right? So if you are of course, there are many categories of integrative principle. Yeah. In order to carry out integration, we must have the integrative principle. But the most embracing, the most comprehensive integrative principle is Tawheed. We need to go back to Tawheed and then go to its application at various levels. I will show this in examples I'm talking about in my own experiences. All right. Now, I just in order to emphasize the kind of thing that I have been doing for a long time. This is my personal experiences of working on integration. My first, I take here as the first based on my research and based on my publication. So in 1984, there was 38 years ago, my first paper published in a journal based on a term paper for MA, for MA degree at Temple University in Philadelphia. I published the Tawheedic integration of pluralistic methodology. In other words, here, when you talk about methods of knowing, modes of knowing, venues to knowledge, there are so many methods. I was responding to the view in modern times that there is only one method to arrive at reliable knowledge, which is called the scientific method. I wanted I was responding to that, to challenge that view, all right? So in other words, in that paper, which is, I turned it into second chapter of my book, Tawhid and Science, where basically I covered all the various kinds of methods, empirical, rational, even spiritual methods, hermeneutics, tafsir, ta'wil, all that. In a sense, I covered everything. Now, if some modern scholars call that epistemological anarchy, I do not see that as an anarchy. But if we integrate by means of the Tawhidic epistemology, then we don't see anarchy, but we see that each method has its own place in epistemology. So that was in 1994, my first exercise in integration. Then in 1995, I produced another paper published in Islamic Quarterly in London, Al-Ghazali's epistemological integration of most of knowledge, still something to do with epistemology here. So, but then I was talking about how Al-Ghazali himself integrated these different modes of knowing to the extent so that he was able to overcome his personal epistemological crisis. All right, that was 1985. Then 1987, conflicting integrations in biology. My book, I edited a book and published that year, Critique of Evolutionary Theory. All right, Critique of Evolutionary Theory. So basically the book is about conflicting integrations in biology. There were two integrative principles. Especially in my introduction to the book, I talk about this. I was talking about how basically the same biological data that has been assembled by modern science. They adopted the Darwinian theory of natural selection, basically, to explain biological diversity. But I brought it up, question of how does the Tawhidic integrative principle, in other words, I offer another theory, the theory of gradation. The theory of gradation of beings in the light of Tawhid. All right, that was one. And that was now in 1990, unity of scientific and spiritual knowledge. Yeah, I discussed the question of integration of scientific and spiritual knowledge. In 1990, Ibn Sina's medical synthesis. Right? In other words, Ibn Sina was able to create a synthesis out of medical knowledge from the Greeks, from the Persian, from the Indians, all right, to this, even to a certain extent from the Egyptian civilization. Create a synthesis, and the proof of that is the conflict theory. All right. Then in 2007. The question of integration of science, philosophy, and religion with an example of ecological thought, right? And then in 2021, much more recent, I'm still going ahead and with the issue with the research and writings on the integration, called integral ecology. I published an article on integral ecology in the journal, the Muslim 500, right? Now, a discourse on interactions of natural, cultural, and built environment. How do we integrate the discussions on the interactions of natural, cultural, and built environment? All right, the cultural and built environment will be covered by what is today called human ecology. And then the last one, which very recent one, which is published as a book, is coming out, Synthesis of Traditional Islamic and Modern Biomedicine. taking advantage of the discovery of modern biomedicine. We're going to cell biology, into the DNAs, the study of human genomes, and so on. There is a need. So this is something that it's just the beginning. I think for Muslim scholars who are looking for synthesis and integration, this is a very important area. I call a kind of integration between soul biology, because Islamic biology was based on the concept of the soul, and of course the cell biology in modern science. Well, I think I just come to the conclusion here. Well, to me, I mean, we're looking at the whole picture of this integration thing. Integration of knowledge is crucial to the expansion of knowledge, advancement of human understanding, and development of civilization. These are very very broad things, but that's how I summarize. In general terms, what's the important significance of integration of knowledge. Number two, integration of knowledge will enrich universal ideas, because we have no choice. We have to go. We could say that integration is universalization. So it will enrich universal ideas and perspectives and broaden the horizon of our thinking. It is central to, so if you are going to do it a practical thing, all right, you say, okay, I'm talking just theoretical, conceptual, what does it mean to our everyday life, to the running of society? Well, I say it is central to systematization. Here, systematization. So systematization is needed in management, in administration. Well, any organization needs a systematization. It needs a systematization and systems creation. So the degree, the quality of our civilization depends to what extent we are able to come with, to systematize it, to come up with systems creation. And then another conclusion, it is important, integration of knowledge is important to the Islamization of knowledge agenda. Please, I think it's important to bear in mind. We cannot go far in Islamization of knowledge unless we advance in integration of knowledge. And finally, last but not least, we will enhance the quality of our knowledge culture, which means the university. The university is the center of knowledge culture, and it will advance the cause of higher education. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam, Prof. Okay. So through the chat box, there are two questions here. Okay, let me read it for you. From Sister Arafah Karim. Okay, thanks, Prof, for such a great presentation. As far as integration is concerned, it became an accepted concept in the academic world. But some are of the opinion that integrations of knowledge from an Islamic point of view still remains at a theory level or initial stage without transforming into their practice. Would you please mind explaining your view in this regard?
Well, I think I don't share that. I don't share that view. But sorry to talk about my own experience. From 1995 until 2000, I was the deputy vice chancellor of University of Malaya, in charge of academic and research. All right. I took a lot of changes in university. All right. Because I wanted to apply my knowledge about integration. So many people do not know. Yeah. Let's say, for example, at the Faculty of Science in Malaya, that was the old style of dividing the faculty into small departments. All right. And each department has its own life. just talking among themselves, not interacting with others, although they come from the same faculty, the same kuliah in Ayanta, all right? I use my position in the sense to reform that faculty, bringing in the concept of integration. I abolish the department system, all right, to the greatest extent possible. So, for example, for the field of biology, I don't divide them into departments of zoology, there's a botany, and genetics. No, it's just the center for biological studies, where they are all, regardless of their field of specialization, within that broad discipline, they interact, because the idea was to bring about a greater intellectual interaction. That's what I did. All right, and I apply also that in terms of Islamic studies. I didn't in Malaya at the time. There was the Academy of Islamic Studies, and then also the Department of Islamic Studies. I abolished that. I merged the two into the current Academy of Islamic Studies. Not only the academic studies pursuing studies, the so-called traditional field, Usuluddin, fiqh, and but they have to interact also with the other faculties. So, well, that's putting things into practice, you know. Of course, the Malaya, I cannot use the word Islamization. I mean, the terminology, I don't use that terminology, but the spirit, the substance of that, basically what Islamization is all about. I think in other words, integration of knowledge is not only theory, not only a set of concepts, but we can put that into practice. But first, we must get the concepts right. That's very, very, very important, understanding of that. That concept of integration. Going back to this question, what are to be integrated into what to be integrated, all right? How to be integrated, yeah? The method to be integrated. I think we stick to that. Then we can go into detail. Of course, that's the framework, and then we go into details. Right? Thank you. Today's question.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Dato Prof. Another question, the last question, okay, the last question. Integration has been the mainstay of IOK since 1977. So to be practical, can we take the less ambitious route, like convergence of cognitive and affective domains governed still by Tawheed?
Well, I think this depends on how we understand and use the word Islamization of knowledge. Right? When I said Islamization of knowledge embraces integration, of course, I mean, I understand Islamization of knowledge in a very, very comprehensive sense, as comprehensive as Islam. How comprehensive is Islamization of knowledge? Well, it has to be as comprehensive as Islam. Islam as meaning to the whole content of the Quran, all right? God himself, Allah sometimes used the word Islam to refer to that content of the Quran. Of course, in practice, we cannot do all that in one go. We have to take parts of it. So every kuliah, in other words, can select a particular issue. Of course, depending on what that kuliah is. Yeah. So and from time to time, we have things that are common. Issues of Islamization are common. But otherwise, there are specific issues of Islamization. All right, you want to talk about the convergence of cognitive and active domains. Yes, I mean, let's say that is very, very, very relevant to psychology, very relevant to education, academic studies. In other words, important to the other faculties, but in particular, the education, kuliah, and the certain medicine kuliah, the psychology kuliah, that's important. It happens that, of course, that connection, that link between education and the natural sciences and sciences, and then the religious studies. Yeah. In other words, the topic of cognitive affective study, because it is a psychological issue, all right? So it affects all disciplines. But in terms of role, the kuliah of education can play, as far education issues are concerned, of course, have to play a more important role. Yeah, they're not going to prevent you from coming up with one of the best centers in the world as far as the Islamic conception of cognitive and affective powers of the individual. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Actually, there is another question. Okay, that question actually from Brother Ruslan Hassan, but this one is from Sister Afifa Abbas. Salam, Prof. Dato Osman Bakar. Your speech did make sense and very expanded view, but is philosophy a must in integrating process? Can IRK-based sciences sufficient on its own for IOHK? I mean, in bracket, methodologically, without mastering mathematical-based philosophy for the whole methodological and as content of philosophy itself?
Well, first of all, I would say that
last question, because of the time.
Okay. I have to advise about the use of the word philosophy. For some people, they understand philosophy in such a way that most people become fearful, run away from that. I say, no, it's not the kind of philosophy. You must understand that the word philosophy, certainly as understood by Muslims, covered many different things, aspects, right? Philosophy is not simply that subject that's taught in the subject called philosophy today. No, all right? Or philosophy is not that thing which many religious scholars declare as haram or as kind of harmful. No, yeah. Philosophy is simply knowledge about the universal things that are universal in nature, in scope, in terms of application. So that kind of knowledge, or the principles of the sciences that I mentioned in my presentation, in my slides. So you have to understand that is a kind of philosophy. Yeah, it's just simply hikmah, wisdom. In Islamic context, what is philosophy? Hikmah. And where is hikmah to be found? Is in the Quran, in the Prophetic Sunnah. The Quran says, "Well, Quran Hakim," by the Quran full of wisdom. We don't have to go far. Is that all right? Since there are many categories of hikmah philosophy, different kind, and in the past history, there is philosophy even in the jurisprudence in Islamic law. There is hikmah. There is philosophy in the school of Kalam. There is philosophy in Sufism. There is philosophy in the school of the Falasifa. All right? Yeah. So now we choose the one which is relevant to our own field. Yes, we do that. We need philosophy to talk about different kinds of methodology. There's no doubt about that. All right? In fact, we cannot escape from philosophy. But which philosophy, what kind of philosophy, that depends on the context, the circumstances. Which one, which kind of philosophy do that. So in terms of methodology, regardless of the subject, we have to understand what is the Islamic view of the various ways to obtain knowledge. That is a question. To talk about method is to talk about how can we gain new knowledge? How can we derive knowledge? All right, we go to the Quran, we go to Revelation, go to the Hadith, we go to the wisdom of our ulama. There are so many. Yeah, in other words, we accept tafsir as a valid method, of getting knowledge, new knowledge. We appreciate even ta'wil in the positive sense, as in understood by the Sufis. All right, the question of ilham, different degrees of ilham, we accept that, different degrees of intuition. In other words, all kinds, not one. The group of modern scholars who say that the only way to knowledge is the scientific method, the empirical method, use of our physical senses, the use of experiments. Other than that, it's not reliable. That we don't accept. We have to assert that when it comes to methodological study of knowledge, all valid avenues we accept. And it's not anarchy, it is unity in the light of the tawhid that Allah is varies. But the unity of all those matters is as firmly established by this very, very important principle that Allah is the omniscient, the knowledgeable, the most knowledgeable, and also the most wise. All right, thank you.
All right, so actually there will be there is one question, last question. I feel so, I think I better to read it to you also. Okay, there is many arguments that present knowledge is not, okay, sorry, this is Mr. Uddin, Mr. Uddin. There is many arguments that present knowledge is not neutral, okay, and produced only for benefits of the West. So how can we integrate knowledge without creating Islamic paradigms of knowledge?
Well, your question, you're mixing, I'm sorry to say, first of all, you said that you're quoting some arguments. You're quoting, or rather you're referring to many arguments that present knowledge as not neutral, all right? Yes, it is true. We accept that. We accept that knowledge is not really neutral because it always has a context. Yeah? Knowledge has a context. Human knowledge, we're talking about human knowledge, not divine knowledge. As far as human knowledge is concerned, it has context. Can be small context, narrow context, large context. All right. There must be certain things that influence us. All right. Especially, like, let's say, yes, knowledge is very vast, but from that vast ocean of knowledge, which particular part do you want to study first? So then you're choosing a particular part. You are influenced by certain factors. All right. What to study and not to study? That is the first question. In trying to answer that question, your culture will influence that. Your own beliefs will influence that answer. You cannot run away from that. All right. So your education, your environment, your society will influence your decision what to study and not to study. Our problem is now we follow the West. They dictate to us what to study and not study. That's the problem. They dictate us what to study and not to study. Look at our curriculum, look at the methodology of how we teach. We are just consumers. Yes, from the point. So that go to your second part of your question, how to integrate knowledge without Islamic paradigm of knowledge. Yeah, but before you ask what paradigm of knowledge, know first what is the truth. Know first what is the truth. Know first what is acceptable and not acceptable. Yeah, you cannot straight away go to to what is the Islamic paradigm of knowledge. Second paradigm of knowledge I mentioned already in the broader term. All right, anything that conforms to Tawheed, anything that conforms to the Sharia, that is valid as far as we are concerned. The rest are details. To go into details, Yeah, so many kinds of paradigm. Even within Islam, within Islam, you can develop many paradigms. There's not just one paradigm in Islam, Islamic epistemology. All right. That's why we have different schools of thought in Islam. Why do we have different schools of thought? Partly because we subscribe to different paradigms, but still we are all Islamic. Islamic doesn't mean it's only one paradigm. Stop. No, it's not. Yeah? Within Islamic epistemology, we can have many paradigms, depending on the subject, the purpose, and so on. Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you for the valuable and beneficial talks on this topic. Prof. Dato has explained to participants the meanings of integrations and the process of making collections of objective into a unified whole. And you also have explained the fundamentals, elements of integrations, like things to be integrated, the goal of integration, integrator, and methods of integration. For example, I will choose one, things to be integrated, what we need to be integrated there, data of various kind, ideas and concept and theories and perspective. The business of university should be integrations. Oh, so this is very interesting. We should be trained for intellectual power, habit, and having strong synthetical power. You also mentioned the idea of ontological, theological, cosmological are important in the integration. And universalization is necessary step into integration. Another that need to focus epistemological foundations of integrations of knowledge, levels of integration. There are three: micro, macro, micro, and intermediate. And another interesting point that Prof. Dato has raised about the connection between IOK and IOK. This also can get confused. Integrations of knowledge and Islamizations of knowledge. So for IOK, the integrations to produce, to arise, and central to Islamizations. And IOK, definitely essential, Tawhidizations of knowledge. So I would like to apologize for any shortcomings from me along the way this session. So once again, we want to say thank you so much to our distinguished speaker, Yang Berbahagia Professor Emeritus, Dato Osman Bakar, and to all participants for this session. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to our dear MC, Dr. Faizah Idrus.
I see the face of Brother Fatih. Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam.
It's nice to see you, mashallah.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Waalaikum, Prof. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Susanna, for a very lively session. And of course, we would like to thank our keynote speaker just now, Professor Emeritus Bakar. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move